Welcome back, and in this lesson we're actually going to be styling the footer for our web page. So in this lesson we'll set up the styling for our footer. We'll add some classes to our HTML document to allow us to style our footer and separate that from the rest of our document. We'll add an HR tag, which is a horizontal rule tag that will put a horizontal line or a horizontal rule under our content and above our footer to show a separation between the two areas of the site. And we use horizontal rules quite a bit in HTML. I just want to show you how we put them in and how we actually style them. Once again, we'll use our nav tag to identify our navigation area, and we'll assign classes and style our footer navigation similar to the way that we set up the main navigation for our main menu bar. So with that, let's set up and style our footer area layout for our page. Alright, so let's go ahead and drop out of our presentation, get into our development environment. And the first thing I want to do, I want to come back into our index.html file and I want to go to this bottom closing div tag. As your pages become larger and larger, I tend to add comments to these closing elements so I know what they pertain to. So I'm going to go ahead and add a comment to this closing element to let me know by glancing at this page that this closing div element pertains to my container. Because if you remember right, we actually set up this opening div up here and we gave it an ID of container. This is actually what contains everything that's part of my page. And I want to come down and actually put down here that this is the closing element for that container div. And the reason being, on this page it's not such a big deal because one, it's not that large and I don't have a lot of stacked divs. But as you get into more complex pages, you may have 5 or 6 or 10 closing divs that are all stacked on top of one another based on how you're setting up your page. It's always a best practice to label those so that it's easy for you to keep track of where you are inside your page. And again, not a big deal with this page because it's not very complex. But as you get into more and more complex pages, if you put those comments down there, it'll be easy for you to identify, okay, this is the closing div for my container, this is the closing div for my section, this is a closing div for a navigation element, or whatever. I mean, it's a great idea to actually label these. So let's go ahead and save those changes. And again, that's just something that I've been doing for 15 years, probably 10 years, to keep my complex pages easier for me to read. Now, because we use floats in the preceding section, we'll need to clear those floats. Remember, we actually floated this image inside of our page. So in order for me to work correctly with my navigation system in the footer, I need to actually clear those divs. So I can reuse that clear element, that clear styling that we set up there, just by adding another div into my page, which I'm going to do. So right above my opening footer tag, I am actually going to clear out those divs so I've got a fresh document flow for my footer area. So it's clearing out anything that's above it for floats. So now my footer section is now back in normal document flow. And that's what we're doing when we actually clear these divs or clear these floats. By the way, in the college classes I teach, that's one of the things I see most often with my new students as they're just beginning to learn HTML and CSS. That clear is one of the things they'll forget that'll actually mess up the way their document flows and the way they're setting up their document. So it's an important concept to keep in the back of your mind. Always remember, you really need to have that clear there if you've got floats that precede your content and you want to get back into normal document flow. Alright, so let's add a horizontal rule to the top of the footer to add some separation between the footer and the page itself. So inside my index.html file, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new HR tag. So I'm going to come right below where I've got that closing div, and I'm going to put an HR tag and give it a class of rule. This is going to be the horizontal rule that we're going to display across our page. Let's go ahead and save those changes. And if you refresh your browser window, you'll already have that rule in place. We haven't styled it, but you'll notice now we've got that nice horizontal line that's going from left to right that goes across our page, and it stretches the width of the page minus the padding that we've actually added to the content. Now what I want to do is I want to actually make some styling for it. So I'm going to go back into my text editor, go to main.css, and I want to scroll right below my C because this is going to be for horizontal rule. So I'm going to type hr.rule. That's the actual class that we gave our horizontal rule. If you remember, if you look back there, we actually gave it a class of rule. Now we're actually going to target that class and put in some styling. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some padding, and I want padding of 0. Next thing I want to do is I want to give it a margin top. and my margin top is going to be 25 pixels. And this is going to push this rule away from our content, 25 pixels down. I want to say border none. After my border none, I want to give it a border top. And that border top is going to be medium. And that's basically the width. I'm going to give it double lines because we actually have different types of borders that we can have. And I want to get a color of 333, which is a gray. Next thing I want to do is I want to give the color itself for our background is going to also be 333, so everything matches and kind of blends in. I want to give it a text align of center, and you'll see why we do the text align in a second. And I want to give it a width of 75%, so it's only going to stretch 75% across our browser window. So if I save those changes and refresh my browser window, this is a great time to pause to type all that in. Now I'm going to refresh the browser window, and you'll notice now I've got the nice double lines. They've come down 25 pixels. I've got that nice gray color, and there's 75% width of the browser window itself. Now what I want to do is I actually want to add a design to the center of my line. And again, you don't have to do this. I tend to do this just because I think it looks nice. It makes it look much more professional. So now I'm going to say hr.rule, and again, we're targeting that class that we just set up. But now I'm going to use a pseudo element and say after. And I want to say content, and this is where we actually get kind of tricky because I'm actually going to use this nice little graphical content inside my horizontal line. So I'm going to come right in there, and I'm going to put in that nice cool symbol. By the way, that's an HTML entity that you can use. And again, you'll have copies of all these exercise files if you can copy it, because it's going to be difficult to find on your keyboard. It's an actual ASCII character. I want to say display is going to be inline block. So I want that to display as an inline block. I want the position to be relative. I want the top of this to be negative, and you can use negative, 0.7 em. So that's actually going to center this in that line because it's actually about 1.4 ems in height, that character that we're using. The font size, I want to be 1.5 em, and that's what we just talked about. So we're centering it. That's why we do the negative 0.7, because it's actually half the size of that particular font. And I could actually say negative 0.75 if I want to be very precise, because you can actually get that precise. I want to say padding. Now the top is going to be 0. And top and bottom, I'm sure should say are 0. And the left and right are going to be 0.25 em. And then what I want to do is I want to give it a background color of pound EEE. And that's going to be a much lighter shade of gray than the actual line itself. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. This is a great time for you to pause if you want to type those in. I want to refresh our browser window, and now you'll see I've got that nice little symbol that's actually displayed in the center of my horizontal line. And again, it's not unusual for us to do stuff like this as we're setting up different areas of our site. And again, it just makes it look a little bit more professional. And the reason I gave it that background color of 333, you'll notice we set that up here. And again, that's so that it actually looks like it's part of our background. If my background was a different color, I'd actually use a different color for that horizontal rule. I'm basing that on the color that I used for the background. All right, so now let's actually set up our footer navigation. All right, so the first thing I want to do, we're actually going to start working now on the navigation elements themselves inside of our footer. I want to go back into my index.html file, and because again this is navigation, I want to enclose those UL tags in nav tags inside of my HTML. And again, that's following best practices. Because this is a navigation section, I'm going to go ahead and indent those. I want to add a class to the navigation element, so I'm going to go into my opening nav tag and give it a class, and this is going to be footer nav. I want you to notice that I used single quotes in this footer nav for the class and not double quotes, and the only reason I did that is so you can see that you can use both. You can use double quotes and single quotes to identify your properties inside your attributes. So let's go ahead and save those changes. Great time for you to type that into your site. Now let's add the following styles to the style sheet for our copy. So I'm going to add a class to my copyright. So that paragraph tag, I want to add a class of copy. And again, I'm just doing this just so we can style the actual copyright text itself. Let's go ahead and save those changes. So now I've got a class of copy for my copyright text. I've got a class of footer nav for my nav element. And now I want to go into the style sheet. And first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and style that copyright text inside of our document. So I'm going to go back to main.css. I'm going to scroll up because again, I want to keep these alphabetical so they're easy to find. I'm going to say class of copy. And the classes or the styles I want to assign to that are font size is going to be 12 pixels. I want to go ahead and set up a padding left. And my padding left is going to be 15 pixels. It's going to push it off that left edge. And I want to float this to the right. So I'm actually going to float this to the right side of my page. And again, I'm doing this so you can see not only can we float images, but we can actually float any elements inside of our HTML document. So let's go ahead and save those changes. You'll notice now, great time for you to pause to type that in. But when we go back into our browser and refresh, you'll notice that we've got the text now sitting over on the left edge. When I refresh the browser, it's going to resize and go to the right side of the screen and give me 15 pixels off that edge based on how we set up the styling. And normally, copyright text is normally smaller than the text that's on your page, and that's why I've actually set that text smaller. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to go in and add a clear class, because again, now we floated that copyright text. So inside my HTML document, in order to get back into normal document flow, I want to copy that clear div that we've got right below our section, Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, come right below the paragraph and paste that in place. Because again, I want to get back into normal document flow so I can actually start setting up the navigation. So let's go ahead and save that change. And again, if we refresh the browser window, no change in the way that we see it, because nothing's changed. I've just gotten back into normal document flow. Make certain you add that clear class right below our paragraph that we floated. Now I want to add styles for our footer navigation. I'm going to go back into my main.css file, and you'll notice we broke out the navigation for our main nav. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that comment because I'm going to do the same thing below that. I'm going to put another comment, and this is going to be my footer navigation. So I'm just going to change that main to footer. And now I know I've got my footer styles that are set up in this area. First thing I want to do is I want to target the footer nav. Remember we gave this a class of footer nav? So I want to go target that footer nav, and this is going to be very similar to what we had done with our main nav. I want to give it a width of 100%. So I want it to be 100% of the browser window. Next thing I want to do is I want to hide that overflow. So I'm going to say overflow hidden, just in the event that we have any overflow. And I want to say the position, I want it to be relative to the parent element. I'm going to come right below that, and now I want to target the UL itself. So I'm going to say footer nav, and I put UL to target that actual tag itself. And again, we're targeting this UL that's inside the footer nav class. For that footer nav UL, I want it to float left. And again, we're going to do this very similar to what we had done on the previous navigation. I want my list style type to be none, because again, I'm taking away any of that decoration that's part of there. My margin is going to be 0. My padding is going to be 0. And remember, we could have actually put these in our reset. We didn't, but we could have for the UL element, so we wouldn't have had to type these into the CSS file. I want the position to be relative, and now it's relative to the parent element. So it's actually going to be, that UL is going to be relative to the footer nav. I want it to be left 50%. So what we're doing here is we're starting to center this in our screen or in our browser window, and I want my text align for each one of those elements to be center. So right below that formatting, I want to look at those LIs, and now we're actually going to be targeting the LI tags that are inside my UL that are inside the footer nav. So again, using specificity, we're going to get very specific about what we're targeting. So I'm going to say dot footer nav. I want to say UL, LI, open and close my curly braces. So now we're looking directly at that list element that's inside my UL. And we got to spell footer nav correctly. That would have been disastrous. Would have taken me forever to find that too. Now I want these to display as block, because remember, they're normally inline elements. I want them to display as a block because I'm using them as navigation. I want them to float left inside my browser window. I want my list style to be none. So we're taking away any of the decorations that are part of that list element. After list style, I want my margin to be 0. My padding to be 0. Oops, let's get my semicolon in there. I want my position to be relative. And again, now they're relative to the parent element, which in this case is the UL. And I want them to be right 50%. So again, we're going back to that centering aspect. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. This is a great time for you to pause to type in those 3 groups of styling that we've done, because we're not quite finished yet. By the way, if I refresh the browser window now, we'll start to see that that formatting is starting to take effect. We still haven't got it where we want it yet, but you can start seeing now that it's actually starting to take effect. Now we actually have to target those anchor tags. So I'm going to go back into my main.css. And again, with specificity, now I'm going to get very specific again. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this so we don't have to type it again. I'm going to come right down below there because now I want to target those anchor tags. So I'm just going to put an A at the end of that. So now I'm looking at the footer nav class inside the UL, inside the LI, and target the anchor tags that are part of that LI. And I'm going to put my opening and closing curly braces. The first thing I want to do is display those as a block, because now we're actually going to set up the menu itself. I'm going to make the color of the text black. And I'm just going to go ahead and type in, we know what the hexadecimal value is. I'm just going to type in the text this time. My margin, I want 0 on the top, 0 on the bottom. I'm sorry, 0 on the right, 0 on the bottom, and 1 pixel on the left. My padding is going to be 3 pixels on the top and the bottom, and 30 pixels on the left and right. That's going to give us that separation between those menu selections. And my text decoration is going to be none. I don't want anything displayed, no discs, no circles, none of that stuff. And now I just want to go ahead and add a pseudo element so that we actually get an indication when we hover over them. So I'm going to say footer nav. And again, I want to go in the UL, LI, A, and then colon hover. So when I hover over those, this is what I want to happen. First thing I want is I want the background color to change. So I'm going to say background, colon, and then pound 369. And again, I'm staying with the colors that we've been using on the site. I want my border radius to change 5 pixels, so they're going to get a little bit rounded corners. And then I want the color of the text to actually become white. Oops. And end that with my semicolon. Let's go ahead and save all those changes, because we've just about finished now our navigation for our footer section. Let's go ahead and scroll up just a little bit. Great time for you to pause to get those last 2 blocks in. I'm going to go ahead and refresh our browser window, and you'll notice now we've got this nice hover effect over our elements, and we've got a nice little menu area down in the bottom that's very similar to the menu section we set up at top, except we don't have a bar itself. So the next thing I want to do, let's go ahead and set up our terms area so it too displays like a normal terms section would display on a website. Alright, so now what's left in the footer section is actually just set up the formatting and the styling for our terms of use. So I'm going to go back into my index.html file. I'm going to look at the paragraph that actually has that terms of use anchor, and I'm going to give it a class. And that class is going to be equal to terms. And again, you could name these anything you want. By the way, you'll notice that I'm always using lowercase, and it's always a best practice when you're naming any of this stuff to use lowercase or camel case as you're naming these. And there's some reasons for that based on how servers are set up and how they actually read these files, but it's just a best practice to use lowercase. Let's go ahead and save that change. Now, because we floated our elements, remember, we've got to clear those floats to get back into normal document flow. I'm going to go ahead and grab this div, Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, and I'm going to come right down below that closing nav tag, and I'm going to insert that div. Because again, I want to clear out the floats to get back into normal document flow from where we set up the navigation section. Now I actually want to go in. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Great time to pause to put that in. I want to go into my main.css file and now add some stylings for our terms section of the web page itself. So I'm going to go up into my classes and I want to go to terms. So I'm going to come right down below where I've got my size. And again, I'm keeping this alphabetical so it's just easier for me to find these on large sites. And I'm going to say .terms. So I'm actually going to set up this first class for that terms section. I want to give it a line height of 50 pixels. And again, you can make these anything you want. I'm just doing this because it's just, I think it's going to look all right. It's going to look pretty good. Text to line is going to be center. Then I want to come down and I actually want to style the actual anchor tag itself. Remember, inside this terms class, we actually have an anchor tag that actually holds the terms of use that when our users click on it, it's going to take them to the terms of use for our site. So now I'm going to come down there and put in terms space A for my anchor tag. And in that anchor tag, I want to give it a color. And my color is going to be 999. So I'm going to use a gray color. Actually, it's kind of a light gray color, so the terms does not stand out like the menu does. And I want to give it a text decoration of none. Then I'm going to come right below that because I actually want to add a hover effect to this also. So I'm going to say .terms A and then colon hover. Again, we're using that pseudo element hover to get our hover effect. And all I want to do here is just change the text color. When we hover over it, it's going to become pound 069. So now we've added 3 styles for our terms area. I'm going to go ahead and save all those changes. Great time for you to pause to put those in. I'm going to refresh our browser window. And if you look at where the terms is right now before I refresh, when we refresh, it's going to come to the center. It becomes a light gray. And you'll notice when I hover over it, I get that nice blue color that we've been using throughout the site. Now if I click on that and I actually had a hyperlink to it, it would take me to my terms of use page for our website. And that's how we do that. And keep in mind, all you'd have to do to add that hyperlink is inside our pound symbol, just put the name of the page we were using for the terms. Normally it would be terms.html or terms.php or whatever. However we name that page, we'd actually have to have the route to it inside those quotation marks. So the next thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about these span elements that we actually put in our paragraphs and how we can actually do styling inside paragraphs themselves if we want text to stand out. But one thing I do want to point out, let's go ahead and save all our changes. I've already been asked by some of the students in my college class, what would you use this for? What would you use this type of site for? This would actually be a pretty good blog site. Now granted, it's not dynamic, so it's not going to be really big, but if I wanted to add additional content to this page, for instance, let's say I want to add another section to my page. I could actually go up in here into this first article. I'm going to grab everything from that first article, from the opening article tag to the closing article tag, including my clear, because I do want to clear those floats. I'm going to copy that, Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac, and I'm going to come down below that last article, and I'm going to paste this in place. I'm just going to add another article. I'm going to change the title just so you can see that we can actually add this paragraph very easily to this. I can actually pull this clear out, by the way. I didn't need it because I forgot I've got a clear after my section. Let's go ahead and save all those changes. Let's make certain I've got a clear, which I don't. I actually need this clear in between these two articles. Control C on the PC, Command C on the Mac. Control V on the PC, Command V on the Mac to paste it. When I save all those changes, now I've actually added a third article to this page, and it's picked up the formatting, although we didn't grab our image. Let's grab the image too. I forgot about the image. It's picked up our formatting just like we had in the other article, in the previous article. I'm actually going to put the image inside the article tag. And actually, I probably should have put all of those images inside that article tag because they pertain to that article. I'm just going to change this alt text to 3. Refresh our browser window, And now you'll notice we've got a third article inside of our page, and it's picked up the formatting based on those classes we set up, just like the formatting of the first one. So I could just alternate these articles back and forth if I wanted to add additional content to this. It's not difficult to do at all. Normally what I would do if this was my site, I'd actually have all this dynamic, but that's way outside the scope of a basic introduction to HTML and CSS. But I mean, you could actually use this to put a group of articles on your page. Anyway, let's move into the next lesson and look at how we can actually access these span elements and style text individually in our paragraphs.